And
Hi, welcome to Until We Arise, where we bridge a divided people to loving community, empowering resources, and a compassionate Christ. My name's Veronica. I am our co founder and CFO.
hi, everybody. And my name is Rachel. I'm the founder and CEO of Until We Arise. Our vision is to build an empowered community all over the world of women who combat injustice and oppression with love and compassion.
Yes. And so we want to
Yes,
welcome you guys back to our
welcome.
Love Is series. And so today we're actually going to be talking about Love is Fearless.
Ooh,
And the main verse that we're going to be focusing on is on First John, and that is chapter 4, where we're going to be kind of basing this conversation on. And the verse that we're looking at is, I'm going to pull up my Bible here. I'm a little old school, but I think we're going to have it up on the screen. And so it's First John chapter 4, verse 11. And actually, I'll read from there because I'm out of a different version. But it says, I'm sorry, not verse 11, verse 18. It says, there is no fear in love, but perfect love drives out fear, because fear has to do with punishment. The one who fears is not made perfect in love.
eek. That's intense.
It is. It is intense because, I mean, there's definitely been times where I have been fearful.
Yeah.
And I know I've read this and thought, dang, like, so what does that mean, God? Like, what do you mean your perfect love casts out fear?
Yeah, and I also
And
feel like I'm sorry. I also feel like
no, you're
remember
good.
everybody, we're recording from Los Angeles and Tijuana. So some of the
Woo-hoo.
delay is because we are recording from two different countries. What an amazing podcast we have.
We're international.
We are international. But what I think is so amazing, even in this, it's like it's a beautiful scripture that I'm like, perfect love drives out all fear, right? And I have that part memorized and I go for it. And I'm like, I'm scared right now, God. Perfect love drives out all fear. And it's almost one of those things I want to repeat again and again. Like it's
Hmm.
like a little kid
Like
when
a
you're like
mantra.
afraid. Yeah, like a mantra that like just kind of helps you. But I think
Hmm.
in reflecting back and going through it, it's kind of hard. Like perfect love drives out all fear, or there's no fear in love in all this conversation, but how?
Right.
The
Yeah.
how is what makes it hard for me. And I'm like, I'm just looking forward to exploring that a little bit more today and sharing. So before we jump into that, friend, when we think about fear, what are the
Hmm.
images like that come to your mind on fear?
Um, Images that come to mind. I think like one of the most recent moments that I can think of for me where I was like feeling pretty fearful. Um, so we went to Costa Rica for our honeymoon, right? And I was so
Oh,
excited,
stop
but there
showing
was
off.
no, but I was like super excited because besides like Peru, this is like my first trip outside of a country that I know. So that was like the first thing of making it exciting. But also there was all these activities that were included in our honeymoon package. And I remember like preparing for them with like we would do like push-ups every day. Remember like we were
Oh, I
recording
do
ourselves doing
remember
push-ups
that.
because I was like, I gotta be able to like white water raft and this and that. And so the first activity we did was zip lining. And I was like, oh, I got this under my belt. I've been zip lining before. It's not a big deal. I went zip lining in Big Bear before. So I was like, this is cool. But it mentioned there was this thing called a Tarzan swing. And I didn't really know what that meant. Like I read and I was like, okay, cool. That sounds fun. I just figured it was like another type of zip line. So we've been through some of the zip lines, and so some of them are like literally in the trees, like they just build this little like plank in the tree, and you're standing there. And then other ones are actual like structures of platforms have been created. And so we get to the point where they're like, okay, now we're gonna head over to the Tarzan swing. And we're like, okay. And I'm kind of like, don't know how I feel about it because I don't know what it is. And then we get to this structure, and it's just like a ladder that goes up to like this like platform. And so he is telling us like, we're gonna go up there, we're gonna like put you on this like harness, and then you're just gonna jump off. And I was like, and so from the bottom, I'm like, okay, it's not that high. I think we're good. And actually,
Girl.
like I was totally chill. Like we walk up there, we get up. So we were in a small group. So it was like Val and I, but then there was like three other people. There was these two girls who travel on their birthdays every year. And then there was this other girl who was actually on her honeymoon, but they were on like the second leg of their honeymoon. So her husband didn't want to do this. He decided to go like on a chocolate tour, and she was like, I'm still going. So this was our group, right? And so they go before us, and we're all on the platform at this point. We're all standing there. And so all the other three girls have gone in. So I'm kind of watching them, and like one of them hit their butt jumping off and stuff. So I'm taking note of like what not to do. And at this point, I'm totally like, okay, yeah, let's do this. So the guy's harnessing me up. He gets there, and then he opens this little gate. And I'm
Uh-uh.
standing on the edge of the platform, and all of a sudden, I feel like the platform just got like 10 times taller. And I looked down and I was like, because the thing also is maybe like I'll post on my because I have a video because Val recorded me, so maybe I'll post the
Please,
video on my
actually post it
Instagram
on
after
Until We
this.
Arise. Post it on Until We Arise that you'll use it.
And so there's a stretch of like a field that we're in, but then they specifically, I think they intentionally put this platform close enough that part of when you jump off, you end up kind of going over this little like ledge off of that part of the field and you come back. So it's not major like some other ones I've seen on social media, but it's enough where you're like, if my bungee breaks on that part, I don't know where I'm falling down to.
That's
And
scary.
so I'm standing on the edge, and the guy's like, okay. He's like, now you just got to jump off. And I looked at him, and it's in Spanish, right? But I look at him and I'm like, I don't think I can do this. And he's like, yeah, yeah, you can. And I was like, no, 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 no. I don't think you understand. I don't think I can do this. I can't jump off this platform. And he was like, no pasa nada. Like, nothing happens. It's fine. He's like, it's not a big deal. And so at that point, like, then all the, so like, it's, the tension's building up. Like, the
Yeah.
people down at the bottom are like, you can do this, girl. You got this. And then Val's like, it's okay, babe. You got to do it. And I'm like, and so at that point, it's like, am I gonna not like, am I gonna get out of this harness and just go back down the steps, or am I gonna jump? And so
Yeah.
I was just like, okay. And I think I kind of jumped, and the guy kind of pushed me, and I just went and I screamed for my life. And then I had like my eyes closed, and then I was like, "Gotta open your eyes." And I looked, and it was so beautiful. It was like the most beautiful, like, because ziplining, you like, we saw these beautiful scenes of greenery everywhere because Costa Rica is super green, and I'm just like swinging, and I'm like, oh. And then all of a sudden, it didn't feel as tall as it felt in that moment, but when I was
Mm.
on the ledge and had to force my like, I had to jump off. I was like, oh, I don't know if I can do this. And so I think like that's the first thing I think of like fear and having to overcome that, and like in a sense being fearless, you know?
Yeah,
I
that's
don't know if
wild.
you've had any kind of similar situation where maybe you had to overcome some kind of fear.
I feel like yours captures it so much better than any of mine because mine are dumb. Like I think like when I was a teacher, I felt all this issue. Like we were doing like a mini zip line at UC San Bernardino on a college trip, and we were doing these trust exercises,
Mm-hmm.
and I had so many insecurities
Yeah.
about my weight and about my like just not people wanting to like having to hold me and touch me like because it's a group building exercise you have to like hold each other and they have to feel the weight
Yeah.
of how heavy you are and all my insecurities like just boiled up and I remember like crying out of dumb fear. It wasn't even like my life was in danger. The zip line that I went on was like indoors, like super like yeah, right, nothing serious. And those kinds of fears still came up though. And like I remember the feeling after
Yeah.
I faced them and I was like, wow, okay. Or even going to Knott's Berry Farm where like you face that one that falls.
Mm.
And I
Oh,
remember
I don't do that one.
I had a moment. I had a moment on one of those because I went up like with such tension. I was like, and I went up to there. I was so tense the whole time, and then I hit it the second time because after I was like, I finished it. I was like, I got this. And then I was joking with my friends the whole time. The second time we were gonna go up on the because you feel like you built up some courage. So I went for a second round, and it was like I almost fainted because I didn't properly count the cost for that
Oh
fear.
my
Like I
gosh.
literally was like I wasn't
Oh my
prepped. The
god.
fear got so overwhelming that
Yeah.
I was like, oh, I'm zoning out of consciousness. And I'm like, get it together. You gotta hold on.
Oh
Yeah.
no.
I
Oh
realized I was a
no.
lot more chicken noodle than I thought I was for sure. But I think like the funny thing is, friend, like when we discuss these kinds of fears, right? Like they are funny.
Mhm.
Um, but
Yeah.
there's something to it, like to say, like, okay, God, like I'll face the fear of something on this external level, right? Even something is like for me, like
Mhm.
having because I had such insecurity with my weight and like that's what I think about doing
Mhm.
adventurous things that people they don't know how chubby I am. I don't know what insecurity I have about that. Like it's a weird psychological battle that I'm like hiding my chub from people that they won't know, and once they actually experience it they're like, "Oh my gosh, I didn't know she was so fat. The thing's going to break." Like it sounds silly, but that's what I would feel. But there was a level
Yeah.
of facing those fears that had I don't know if you can hear the sirens, so like but
Oh, faint,
facing
very faintly. I barely heard it.
facing these fears that are reflective of these superficial things that do have like these internal ramifications or whatever or issues or connections, but like
Mhm.
I think it's harder when like they're fears that we can't even fully identify, right?
Mm,
Like
yeah,
I didn't
for sure.
realize that fear was causing me to act that way. I didn't realize that I had
Mm,
fear in this area or that area. um and I
yeah.
think that speaks to like how addressing these the fears that even this scripture in First John is talking about. Like when I think
Mhm.
about this scripture, I remember I wrote about this in my book because the part that says that the one who the one who fears is not made perfect in love. When we have that, I was like talking about
Mhm.
perfection, and I remember exploring this and then studying it a bit after. I was like, did I say this right? Like, because the fear that they're talking about here, um, as the Apostle John was writing,
Yeah.
he was not discussing the kind of fear that we just like lions and tigers and bears. Oh my! He was discussing the fear of judgment. He was discussing
Mhm.
the fear that the Jews were living with in not accepting Jesus, and that Jesus was providing a way that didn't have to be a fear-based access to the heavenlies, you know? And that's a little like
Mhm.
it's a little different. Like the access to the kingdom
Yeah.
is not through your actions and through being afraid that you're going to get caught slipping, but it really is like the freedom that we get through Jesus, you know? And so I remember like exploring that. I'm like, I don't even know how to address that kind of fear in my life. I don't even
Yeah.
know the fears that we don't even recognize are there. Like when you are up there for you on the platform, you're like, I might die because that bungee cord might break. Do you know what I mean? Like I'm like
Yeah.
I'm on this machine and it might break and or people are gonna know and they're gonna call me fat and whatever dumb insecurities I have.
Mhm.
Those are identifiable fears.
Right.
I think the other ones are a bit harder, right?
Yeah. It's the thing is that it's like this unknown, and you don't like some of it is just you don't even like you're saying like you don't know you have these fears at times. And so then like I'll say for me like being presented with it sometimes is like that in itself is a fear to be like, oh, I didn't even realize I was afraid of this. You know, like
Mhm.
I didn't even realize that was something that was in my heart. And so sometimes just recognizing that alone is part of the fear of what do I do with this now that I'm aware of it? You know, like, or how, what is this like? I think you said, like, how is this affecting me? You know, like, how is this fear impacting my life? And even ultimately, like, my salvation, maybe,
Yeah.
you know, because I'll say, as you're talking, I was thinking about, I remember, I think it was 2020, 2021. No, it was 2020. And there was this, I don't know if it was the Lord. I believe it was, you know, every like the Lord brings us to know things, but I just remember coming across or having very vividly in my mind. There's two things, and I felt like they were very connected. But one was like the sense of being asleep, like spiritually, like not being awakened. And I think part of it was some of the difficult things going on in the states of like race and stuff like that, and me trying to figure out what the word says about that. Um, but then also being reminded of where the word says that some people will like say they know, like believe they're saved, and at the, in the day of judgment, the Lord will say like, "Depart from me, I never knew you," and they're going to
Mm,
be like, "But we
mm,
prophesied in your name and this and that." And I remember having
mm,
like this confrontation and me like realizing like what, like having that fear of like, what if I'm one of those? What if I'm one of
mm,
those people who like come before the Lord
mm.
and the Lord's like, "Depart from me, I never knew you." And I'm like, what the heck? I thought I knew you. And I just felt like in that, like I do believe the Lord was like kind of helping me um like solidify it's not in like these works, like you said, you know, like our salvation is not in works. And so I felt like the Lord's like, it's not in your works, but it's like in that trusting that you know me, and that
Yeah,
trusting that like you have this relationship with me, you know. But I think there was a moment where I realized I may have this doubt or this fear in me. What do I do with it? Like,
yeah,
what do I do with this fear? And like just the fact that I had that in me, like made me afraid that I even had that feeling, and what does that mean, and how do I overcome it, like all those different things that are layered with when you have a fear, you know. And
yeah,
so that's like one of the things I was like thinking of right now as you were talking. I was like, oh yeah, like I remember having that, like the recollect or that realization of that fear and all the things that kind of came with it. um
yeah. I
and
was
so it's just like, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think that's powerful. Like, and I think that one of the things is like us being sensitive enough in ourselves and humble enough to say, "Hey, like this fear doesn't feel right. This is
Mm-hmm.
something that I need to like check in on." And what I feel like what I feel challenged in today in some of our conversations in our prayer is like looking at the us one of the other signifiers that there's fear in our lives, and that is a lack of rest. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when we are fearful,
Yeah.
we can find ourselves restless. Sometimes people
Mm-hmm.
identify that as anxiety and identify it as all these other things that they can say. I'm just worrying, I'm just trying to be responsible, I'm trying to just make sure I'm making good use of my time, I'm honoring my commitments, I'm, being a good steward and all this. But and those things are good things that should happen, some of them, we should be mindful and we should be, but a lot of our actions are rooted in a fear, and we don't realize
Mm-hmm.
how much rest we are missing that the Lord wants to give us
Mm-hmm.
because of our fear.
Mm-hmm.
Fear that we're going to run out of time. Fear that this is too big, and I need to use my every waking moment to handle it, or even fear thing, and like it's just ridiculous to me sometimes how I respond in my life, because yeah, I think sometimes about me not resting and me working harder, I'm going to somehow, you know, fix the problem that is outside of
Mm-hmm.
my scope of fixing. And I think that the writer of Hebrew kind of speaks to that. And I know the Lord spoke
Yeah.
to you about this. So I would love for you to maybe bring that to, let's talk about it.
Yeah, for sure. Um, yeah, so like you said, we're reading in Hebrews 4, and so starting in verse 1.
Sorry.
And no, you're okay. So it's talking about rest, right? And so it says, therefore, since the promise of entering his rest still stands, let us be careful that none of you be found to have fallen short of it. For we also have had the good news proclaimed to us, just as they did, but the message they heard was of no value to them, because they did not share the faith of those who obeyed. Now, when we have believed, and sorry, now we who have believed enter that rest, just as God has said. So I declare on oath in my anger, just as, sorry, I'm reading a little fast, I apologize. Now we who have believed enter that rest, just as God has said. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest. And yet his works have been finished since the creation of the world. For somewhere he has spoken about the seventh day in these words: on the seventh day, God rested from all his works. And again, in the passage above, he says, they shall never enter my rest. Therefore, since it still remains for some to enter that rest, and since those who formerly had the good news proclaimed to them did not go in because of their disobedience, God again set a certain day, calling it today. This he said when a long time later He spoke through David, as in the passage already quoted. Today, if you hear his voice, do not harden your hearts. And so I know for me, like you said, like the Lord had spoken to me through this verse, and it was just there was something about, like you said, the fear that keeps us from entering this rest, right? Like there is a rest that the Lord is promising us, and fear will keep us from it. And I think what the Lord had shown me was like in this fear, sometimes we harden our hearts to things. And so I felt like as it was really in a time of worship, the Lord was showing me like in my presence you have this rest, and it's because like in his presence, like there is a softening of our hearts. And so like for example, as going back
Mm,
to what I was sharing about like this fear of, am I one of these people that will get to the Lord one day and not be recognized by the Lord? Like I could have easily hardened my heart, and like in the fear of even exploring what that meant, or the possibility of I've been living this faith that isn't genuine or isn't truthful or isn't really anchored in the Lord, but anchored more so in my works. If I was allowed that fear to take place, like I could have hardened my heart and allowed even some pridefulness to be like, no, like it's tripping. I'm good. And, like
mm,
kind of like gloss over that and not look at it. But there, I feel like the Lord was like intentional to like draw me in. And so even as I'm reading this, like, well, what? No, before I get ahead of myself, like I was reading this and I thought it was interesting that it was quoting like a passage. And so I like the word. I'm always fascinated how the word will like quote itself or reference itself. And so I recognized that it was like saying like as it was quoted before, do not harden your hearts. And so I wanted to like look more into that. I wanted to understand like what is he talking about? Where is he quoting? And so I'll briefly jump us over to Psalm 95 in verse, I think it's 8. Oh yeah, I have it up there. And so this is the Psalm of David, or David's talking, and he is quoting the Lord, and the Lord said, "Do not harden your hearts as you did at Meribah, as you did that day at Massa in the wilderness, where your ancestors tested me. They tried me, though they had seen what I did. Um, For 40 years, I was angry with that generation. I said, they are a people whose heart goes astray, and they do not know my ways. So I declared on oath in my anger, they shall never enter my rest."
mm.
And so it's talking about the people of Israel when they're in the wilderness, and the Lord had given them a promise, and yet they couldn't enter that, not just the actual promised land, but even the rest that He provided within this promise, because they hardened their believe what the Lord had said to them, what the Lord had promised. Instead of like, and I think like one thing that it mentions is like the Lord's like, you saw what I've already done. Like you've seen you, like they didn't know my ways, he says, even though they saw everything I had done for them. And I think that's something that's very key for us, is like knowing the Lord through our past experience with him, and allowing that to keep our hearts soft to him, to not hardening our hearts to who he is, even if like what we're facing in that moment is new, or feels like it's not coming to pass, or feels like it's not where I want it to be. Like, am I going to harden my heart to what the Lord is saying, or am I going to keep my heart soft and
Yeah.
trust in who he is and who he has shown himself to be?
Yeah, that's so good. I think man, like as you were sharing these scriptures with me and I started to reflect a bit on this, I was like the idea of the hardening of hearts is really what stuck out to me, right? Like you just
Mm-hmm.
described. And I was like, man, like it's just interesting because I was also in worship and prayer, and the Lord was taking me to the scripture um, of Mark chapter 6. And what I
Mm-hmm.
think about this, because I was reading in the book of Mark, or the book of Mark, and I was reflecting a little bit. And as I connected back to what you were saying in our discussion earlier this week, I was like, man, like the Lord seemed harsh with them, right? He was like when the writer of Hebrew was talking, he was referencing what happened with David. He was saying like, we've been here before.
Mhm.
Like the people of Israel, like the Lord was bringing this about to them and saying it kind of harshly. Like, I was angry with them. It's not because I am just being mean, but we've been here. You are choosing to harden your heart towards me
Mhm.
after I've done all these things for you to show you that you had another way, that there was another opportunity.
Mhm.
And I'm like sitting there like,
Yeah.
whoa. And it reminded me because I was reading in Mark. I told you Mark chapter 6, and let me get this, pull it up on the
Yeah.
screen. Let me see, there it is. And as I was reading Mark chapter 6, I just kept on it kept on speaking to me, because as I was, there was something to the moment of Jesus being with the disciples. This is about the time, just so you know where it is, and I'll come back to the exact scripture. But Jesus was hanging out with the
Yeah.
disciples. He finds out that his cousin has passed, and he's
Mm.
sad. And as they're trying to get away, if I'm reading this correctly, as they were trying to go away, there was this moment where he's moved by compassion because there are people crying out for a message. So he does this whole message with them, and he teaches them,
Mhm.
and he doesn't have a chance to get away, but they end up feeding the 5,000 after, right? Like, cuz the people are hungry, and he
Mhm.
tells the disciples, "You feed them." And as he tells the
Yeah.
disciples like, "You feed them," then they are taken to this place where um Jesus says, "Okay, I'm going to go away now, and you guys
Mhm.
go on the boat, go ahead of me." Right? And it's my belief in
Yeah.
that moment that Jesus is taken to a place where he is able to mourn and process the pain. But as he
Mhm.
goes out, he was watching the disciples from the place where he is praying. The disciples go out onto the sea, and the
Mhm.
boat is hitting tribulation. Like there's a storm brewing. Jesus comes
Yeah.
and walks on the water, and they are terrified. And so I'll go actually up to verse 49, where you can see on the screen, it says, "Immediately he spoke to them and said, 'Take courage, it is I, don't be afraid.'"
Mhm.
And I guess I'm a little emotional because I'm realizing what God's saying a little more. Then he climbed into the
Mm.
boat with them, and the wind died down. They were completely amazed, for they had not understood about the loaves, and their hearts were hardened.
Mm.
Um, Let me bring it back to just us. Um, what struck me in that portion was not just that they were scared because they didn't expect him, but them having a hardened heart was something that
Mm.
caused a disconnect from what they had, the miracles that they had just seen. Like, legit,
Mhm.
they fed those people. Jesus didn't go around doing it. He broke the bread, but required that the disciples go, so they witnessed it the same way the Israelites
Yeah.
witnessed the power of God move, right? And the same way, like when the
Mhm.
the writer of Hebrews talking, is like, you've already seen the good things that God can do. Like, how are you slipping? Don't you
Yeah.
want this rest? Like, there's no excuse for you to be this
Mhm.
anxious, in all honesty. Like, I've shown up for you. But at this point,
Yeah.
the hardening of your heart is causing that disconnect. And
Mhm.
and I think about like what God was showing me, like in this moment as we were talking about it. There's like, perfect love drives out fear. Cool, cool, cool. And so God's like, there's fear over here. There's opportunity for rest. Because rest is the
Mhm.
ultimate place where you can let down your hair, be yourself. You can let your, like, stop sucking in your gut, right? Like, you don't have to wear makeup. It's like you can rest in your
Mhm.
husband's arms. You can laugh with your family loud, and who cares if you don't have a cute face while you're laughing, because the laughter is coming from a deeper place, like that joy that comes with just being restful,
Mhm.
right? So we have
Yeah.
fear and rest, right?
Mhm.
And what's that disconnect? It's like, through these three scriptures, you can see clearly it's the hardening of your heart. It's not
Yeah.
like this magic love spell that happens that transforms everything. Like
Mm.
suddenly, like, God's love comes in and melts it all away. While God does do that in certain circumstances.
Right.
But to get to his rest, it does require something inside that says, you know what? Like, I gotta like let my heart be softened. I have to make a decision
Mhm.
to give God this fear. And I guess this is probably a
Yeah.
good time for me to share like my personal experience. And I think when I was I'm just gonna keep us all on the same screen. I was gonna switch it, but we're gonna stay here together. Um, when I
Yeah.
was here, even just now reading it, but I was praying and we were preparing for this time together to make sure we were all on the same page with like being ready for our podcast. And I um I kept on being taken back to a moment in my time in like in my life when like 2007, where
Mhm.
I want to say it was 2007, 2008. It was like right around the time of my dad's second transplant. Um, and they would think it was right before he got his second transplant because I was before. I was, he was, after his first transplant, it didn't go very well for his like liver and he was very moody. And I too was very moody because I was a young adult. Um, and that's just who I was. And we are very alike, very much so alike. We got into an argument and I slammed a cereal bowl to the ground. Milk went everywhere, and I said, "I'm moving out." We got into some dumb argument, and I was livid. By the end of that month, I had found myself a new apartment. I had moved out. Um, but my dad was like legit not well. He was still battling hepatitis, and there was like this struggle that the liver transplant wasn't taken right. He wasn't well. He was still really struggling, and
Mhm.
I had just broken up with my ex-boyfriend and of 6 years. We had been together 6 years. We broke up and I was just kind of like a hot mess emotionally. And as we were worshiping today, the Lord just took me back to that place because I got an apartment in Hawthorne and I was living alone. And as we were worshiping today, God was just showing me there in that place, like um,
Mhm.
almost like a picture of him with arms open wide, like I got you. And I
Mhm.
think like reading the scripture, it's almost like the words were like, "Take courage, it is I. Don't be afraid. Like I'm here with you."
Mm.
And I feel
Yeah.
like in the middle of what I was going through in that time of my life, it was when like I started to say, I need something else because depression is overwhelming me. And I need
Mhm.
God. If I've tried all these other things and I'm supposedly a Christian, but I've never read my Bible, I don't really believe. I'm so struggling with politics and history and all these other things that are like overwhelming me on my reality. And I was torn. I was like, I can't even believe in God anymore.
Mhm.
I was in the middle of like getting to a point where I was going out with my friends and drinking and going clubbing, going to bars. And I was like, I'm a grown up now, so I can have alcohol. I'm not an addict. I can have alcohol in my apartment. So, has a couple bottles of vodka. I bought some beer, and I was like, oh, it's casual. People just drink beer. And I was like, I'm grown. I can do what I want. And
Mhm.
I had no limits. I had cable. I wasn't watching like porn, but I was definitely watching things that were like feeding into my lust, like Sex in the City and other like type of things that just kind of like made me feel like flesh, like my flesh was alive is the
Mhm.
best way I can describe it, like
Yeah.
feeding this
Mm.
need of like culture and everything that's kind of shameful to talk about, right? Like this feeding your flesh of whatever that is. And I
Mhm.
remember in that place, like even in verse 51, he's like, he climbed into the boat with them and the wind died down, right? Like
Mm.
in that warfare of living in my apartment, I remember facing some of the hardest trials of my life in the sense that it felt like a war for my life. Um,
Mm.
I because I guess I think it's because I was leaning into like reading the Bible. I would like after my friends would go clubbing, I'd be like, we're gonna go to church tomorrow. Come spend the night. We'll go to church. And like I would go to church drunk, like or like hungover.
Yeah.
And I was
Yeah.
reading the Bible with the same people that I was going out with. And I was like, come over, we're gonna read and like let's just get it and understand it. And I even have notes in that same Bible where I was like, for real, Red Sea, really? Come on now. I mean, I would write notes like that. Like this is not real. Like my my faith was
Mhm.
just so shaky. And
Mm.
I remember it was because I feel like it was because of my hunger for that. I was in this place of being torn. And it's like the attacks with my
Mm.
depression got heavier. I remember
Yeah.
just one night being so low in my depression that I was like, I intentionally was like, I'm gonna drink all these bottles of beer that I have. And it felt I like talking about it is hard because I feel stupid. And I was like, I'm gonna drink these beers and I kind of remember like sitting in like this hallway looking in the mirror and being like, I wish I had pills. Like I wish I could just end it right now. And I remember thinking about
Mhm.
my students because I was a teacher at the time and how they looked up to me. And I started thinking about my mom, how disappointed she would be and how broken she would be if she lost me. And honestly, like, I was so frustrated. I could sense the war I was in the middle of, right? Like, I just wanted it to
Mhm.
be over, yet I wanted it to be over, but I didn't know what it was, right? I was just done.
Yeah.
And I think about how dark those moments were for me and how God found me there and he got in the boat. And there was like this moment that I had to like sit and just say, okay, I don't know how to do this anymore. And I
Mhm.
remember in that same apartment, there were moments that as I continued to warfare, it was like I would sing and I would dance and start to worship. And I was like, this is stupid. Why am I dancing in this room right now? Like, um, and I would like I remember it wasn't the same day, obviously, it was like different days. The other day that I drank, I just ended up going to
Yeah.
sleep crying. Um, but the other days I would sit there and like be super anxious about losing things and being disorganized. And I remember singing and turning in my house like, you have turned my morning into dancing. And I remember
Yeah.
I was like, forget it, I'm just gonna turn. And I was by myself in my room turning my morning into dancing, and the Lord was like, I'm here with you. And like the answer that I needed was
Mm.
right there. And another time I was sitting in my room, in my living room, like I was like super late for work, I couldn't find my keys, I was stressed, I tore my whole house apart. And I finally just said, you know what, God, I can't. And I just sat and I said, God, I need you. I put my hand down, and right in the cushion of where at that moment, right in the cushion where I put my hand down were my keys. And I'm like, I can go to work. And I ran out. But it was like God was like, if you just stop holding up this thing like you can do it by yourself, I'm
Yeah.
there with you.
Mhm.
Stop hardening your heart, Rachel. And like God didn't show
Right.
me this in that moment. He was like, rest in that moment. But I look back now, had God not met me at that point, like my life would not be where it is now. I was on a downward
Mhm.
spiral of meeting the needs of my flesh, ignoring all the miracles God had done for me, stuck in a prideful, hardened heart, saying, I got this. I don't need you, God. I figured it out on my own. I don't trust you. Your word is not good enough for me. And it was
Mhm.
like as God's showing me this now, it's like, don't allow your heart to continue to be hardened. Like
Right.
it was just like, okay, Like, I want to give you rest. And you, like, that little bit of rest you got in that moment of finding your keys or finding the other item that you thought you had lost, I want you to live your life in that continued rest, not freaking out when you hit a storm,
Mm-hmm.
not running with anxiety because you don't have enough to feed the people, but knowing that God is with you no matter what comes your way. Like, the more you harden your heart to the
Mm-hmm.
limitations of your own hands, the more you're going to find yourself stressed and running around, feeding into your
Yeah.
fear instead of feeding into your faith, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
Thanks for sharing that. I mean, like I think as you're sharing that, like going back to the hardening of our hearts, right? Um, I don't know if it's in this passage, but it talks about like while it is still today, like there's an emphasis about today
Mm,
and saying like it shows like today. And even in that, in the rest, um like I said, I love the word and different scriptures come to me, but like it talks about like there's a part in the Bible where it says like don't worry about tomorrow, for tomorrow has its worries of for its day. Like sufficient is its worries for today. And there is something about like trusting the Lord in the now, in the here. And we're not that kind, like as humans, that's not how we are, right? Like we're very like planning for the next things and moving forward.
mm,
And God's like right here. And there's a reason why his like the Lord's Prayer says like, give us today our the bread for today, right? Like something like that. I'm totally
yeah.
butchering it
Yeah.
up, but it's like give us this day the our daily bread.
Yes. Good
Sorry,
job. Good job.
I'm a Christian, I promise. Um, but there is something about like in this moment, and I think the other part that is really interesting for me is like while you can still hear his voice, do not harden
Mm,
your heart. And it
mm,
is a practice, and like you said earlier, like it's not this like magical potion. And I think that was something that I didn't understand before,
mm.
where it was like perfect love casts out fear. And I'm like, okay, well, where is this perfect love? Because I'm definitely still feeling this fear. And sometimes we think it's like this magic wand that's just gonna like bing, fear is now gone. You're all good. There's no more fear in your
Mm,
life. Like, but it is an active thing. It is in the sense of like I actively am choosing to soften my heart to the Lord in the midst of what I'm feeling. And not like you said, like even in I guess you were sharing, but even in my specific example, like not hardening my heart in that moment. It's like, no, 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 no. That can't be right. God, like whatever you're trying to show me is not right. And hardening our hearts to what he is trying to say, like when he is speaking to us, is us having the humility to like soften our hearts for um and I want to like kind of like unpack that a little because it's like okay,
go ahead.
harden your heart, soften your heart.
Yes.
Like it feels very like Christian, you know, but it's kind of like I the way I best way I can think of is like humbling and pridefulness, like being
Yeah.
humble enough to say I might not be right in what I'm thinking. Like in what I'm perceiving in my specific situation, I may not be perceiving it right. So maybe what God is showing me is something that I haven't been able to see. So let me like be willing to put aside what I think is right in this moment, what I think is or isn't happening, and let me be open to what God is trying to show me and
Yeah.
see if there's something really here. You know, because I think it's pride that a lot like that makes us hard in our hearts because we want it to be a certain way. Because no, 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 then and it kind of like goes back to some of the like what we were talking about last week or the week before. It's like no, then I'm wrong if I accept this. So there's a pride that can take in our hearts, but it is us actively choosing to not give into that and say, no,
Yeah.
I'm going to humble myself in this moment and recognize I am not the creator of the universe. I am not the one who stands outside of time. I am not the one who created me, who knows me better than I know myself. Like the only one who is that is God. And so let me humble myself in this moment and say, okay, God, what are you trying to show me? Even though it's scary. And in that softening of our hearts, in the sense of like humbling ourselves to the Lord, we're then able to enter this rest because like you said, and I think as you were reading it and I noticed you were like, oh, like as you read it, there was this like light bulb moment. And I saw it, but it was something that the Lord was showing me too, like, take courage, it is I.
Mhm.
And sometimes we're afraid in those moments and we allow the pride to harden our hearts because we think we're left to our own devices, we're left to ourselves. And so if I recognize this, then how am I going to fix this myself? So let me just pretend that's not even it. And
Mm.
yet the Lord's like, no, 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 no. Take heart. It is I showing you this. It is I who is with you in the midst of you just figuring this out. And as we soften our heart and allow and recognize, like, it is the Lord with us, that is where we enter his rest. And that was like what God was showing me that day I was worshiping, was like, as I was worshiping and just like, like you worship and you declare things. And I was just like, there's this song, it's actually in Spanish. It's which one is it?
Say it in
There's two songs I'm
Spanish.
thinking, so I'm trying to remember. But I'm not gonna
Sing it
sing.
in
But
sing it in Spanish.
it's Christine de Clario, and I'm trying to remember if it's I think, yeah, it's the one that it's a tus pies, that it's talking about. It says, no hay lugar más alto, no hay lugar más grande que a tus pies. Like, there's no greater place,
Mm.
there's no higher place than at your feet.
I love that
And as
song.
she's ministering in the song, it's beautiful.
I heard it
And
in
as she's
Peru.
ministering
I
in
heard
this
it in Peru the
song,
first time. Yeah, I love it.
oh, yeah. And there's a part where she's ministering and she says, like, it is mi lugar de seguridad. Actually, I think it's part of the song. It says, like, it is mi lugar de seguridad. Like, you are my secure place. And as I was singing to this and I started, like, just declaring, like, who the Lord was for me, like, I was like, Lord, like, you are my place of security. You
Yeah.
are my place you are my fortress. Like, the things I've heard the Psalms say, like, you're my fortress, you're my refuge. And as I was saying that, like, I just felt like the Lord's like, yes, I am your rest. I like my love, like you're saying, is fearless. And in that fearlessness, there is rest. And I was just like, wow, God, like, I joke because we've talked about, like, sometimes when I'm reading the word or in worship, I feel like I fall asleep. And I'm like, because his presence is so peaceful. But it really is that, like, there is no excuses, but like, there it really is a restfulness in his presence, and part of it is like the fear melts away but it takes us to come and actively say, God, like, I am here in your presence. I am here, and I am trusting that who you are and what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
What you're saying is more real than what I'm experiencing, than what I'm feeling, than what I'm seeing. And I am going to humble myself and soften my heart to you in this moment. And it's kind of like, that's like the cheat code for people who like play video games, right? Like, there's these cheat codes that unlock the next level, and that's kind of like that cheat code in a sense that like allows us to enter that rest, even in the midst of the most hard moments, even in the
Yeah.
midst where there's this fear, you know and so
A lot of
I was just thinking of that.
yeah, a lot of
Go
times
ahead.
we don't recognize like the pride that's connected to that fear because like it's hard because our fear is there. Like it doesn't manifest always as fear because we're like, no, this
Hmm.
is just how it should be done because I know what happened last time. I've been disappointed last time.
Hmm.
I didn't this didn't show up like last time. And because I'm
Right.
afraid that it's going to come out like that again, I have to set up my own things to make sure I'm protected. And or I saw how it
Hmm.
happened for my mom or for my dad, and this is what happened with them. And it's like, oh no, no, no. I can't. I'm gonna make sure that never happens to me. And we set up these things that
Hmm.
are according to our own flesh, according to our own like understanding, according to the things that we've seen in the world, the things we've learned,
Hmm.
and we set those up above God.
Yeah.
Not that the wisdom isn't good, but if we
Hmm.
put it above God and what He's shown us and the truth that He's
Yeah.
shown us, then we can find ourselves making choices out of our fear and hardening our hearts
Hmm.
towards the truth of the gospel and the truth of what he has for us. That truth that says, like, we've been here. I got you. I'm going to take you. I'm in the boat with you. And that watch the
Hmm.
fear calm. Watch the boat calm. You know, like the wind of the boat, the wind of the sea calm. And it's like, I think my current challenge is to say, Lord, like, you've, like, let me not forget what you've brought me from.
Yeah.
I cannot allow my own pride because I think I don't want to, or I don't want to look dumb again. I'm scared to love again. I'm scared to put myself out there
Mm.
again. I'm scared to
Yeah.
date again, or I'm scared to do this again because it's going to turn out like last time. And whatever those things, I
Mm.
don't want to let those kinds of things hinder me as if I've never done this before, as if we didn't just feed the 5,000, as if you didn't pull me out of my
Yeah.
season of depression, as if, you didn't say keep me sustained when I didn't have the funds, or as if I just have not like spoken prophetic life and words over other people and seen you heal, and as if, like, I don't want to walk
Yeah.
in that hardened heart, continuing with that same pride, that same root of fear, making my decisions when God has already said, I've taken you through this. And I feel like part of me wants to close with that expectation, that prayer, that people who are listening today, I just feel
Hmm.
like very strongly to say, like, you are listening, you're watching, and you should know that it's not your imagination, that you are in war. Right now,
Yeah.
you're in the middle of something that feels like it's just circumstantial, or it's just a small decision not to date him. It's just a small decision not to date her. It's just a small decision not to keep on engaging in like whatever drinking or partying, or even like putting your money into places that investments or whatever it is that God is like saying, "Hey, second guess that. I know that this is how you're used to doing it.
Hmm.
I know that you don't want to go on this trip that you're supposed to go on. I know it's inconvenient." He's like, but this warfare, your decision in this, your decision to let
Hmm.
love in this area, your decision to say, I will soften my heart and I won't hold up my pride with my spouse. Your decision
Hmm.
matters. Your decision
Yeah.
matters to keep going to church, to keep praying. Like when you pray in tongues in your room, when you're crying out to God, it matters. He hears you. You're at
Yeah.
war. You're at war for your spirit right now. And know that when you look back again and you're realizing, I'm so glad I broke those pieces of bread. I'm so glad I welcomed Jesus onto that boat. I'm so glad.
Hmm.
It's gonna matter. It's so gonna
Yeah.
matter. And so
Hmm.
hold on to the Lord. Trust that if you soften your heart in this area of pride, if you soften your heart in this area of fear that you've been holding up, God is going to meet you. He says,
Yeah.
take courage. It is I. Don't be afraid, because he desires us to live a restful life. So my prayer for you today
Amen.
is that you reach out in that way, that you hold on to the Lord. If you are finding yourself in a place that feels exhausted, reach out to community that will pray with you, that will tell you and have the hard conversations and will listen to you and encourage you and help you to hold on to
Yeah.
the commitments of spiritual discipline that you may be working to find. Amen.
Amen. That's so good. Man, I feel like we could talk about this forever, but that's so good. Yeah. What an encouraging conversation,
Amen.
you know? Man, how do we finish that?
Well,
I
let's
just
just
felt
close out.
like,
Just be encouraged and remember that
yeah,
love,
yeah,
yeah, love is fearless. Love is fearless and it's not magic. I feel like that's really
yeah,
what I want our
that's
next
good.
podcast to be, is like love is not magic. And so
Hmm.
maybe we can
That's
make
good.
that our
Yeah.
next one. But for now, I just want to
Yeah.
say thank you. And if you want to know more about Until We Rise and what's going on and how you can get involved, go to our website. It's
Yes.
www.untilwearise.org. And we pray that you're encouraged. Vero, do you want to share a couple of things going on with us so people can get involved?
Yeah, of course. Definitely. I just super impactful. Uh,
I know. I'm right there with
but
you, girl.
yeah, no. I think one little thing I want to add is like as you're saying, it's not magic, and I think God, what I want to like hinge on or just like focus really quickly is like you said, He wants us to live a restful life, and I think that's really good. Like
Mm,
even though we talked last time about like things are hard and we're promised hard stuff, but even through that, like
mm,
He also promises rest, and it's like this tension that we always talk about. But yeah, so be encouraged.
that's
He does
good.
want a restful life for us. And yeah, so there's so much going on at Until We Arise. And every Saturday, we have We See You Kitchen going out into the communities, feeding feeding the people with sandwiches, but also feeding their spirit through prayers. And so we can always use volunteers to come help package the food, go out to the streets with us, even donating So we want to welcome you to do that as well. Elias Gift has officially launched, and I know we've shared on our Instagram how that delivery went, but we can always use volunteers for that as well with helping put together the boxes and also donations. So as well, if you are interested in either of those two, whether it's Elias Gift, We See You Kitchen, you can go to our website. Like Rachel said, it's www.untilwearise.org, and you can sign up there, or you can click on Elias Gift and hear read more about it and donate if you would like to. We also want to remind you, every Tuesday we are launching a new episode on our podcast, so make sure you have subscribed to our YouTube channel, to podcasts. We're on Spotify, we're on Apple Podcasts. Make sure you're subscribed and share it with people. And also, in case you did not know, wearing this little fancy sweater, Until We
Oh, wait,
Arise.
hold on.
So
Hold on,
if
before you
you
go there,
want,
hold on. So before you jump into there, because I have it on the screen, we have the
yes.
Not Alone support
Oh,
group that I wanted to launch.
oh yes,
So for
yes.
for
Go ahead.
Elia's Gift, as a portion of that, we are also launching Elia's as a part of Elia's Gift, the Not Alone support group. So with this online support group, we hope to create a safe space for women who have experienced the unimaginable loss of miscarriage or stillbirth. And this
Mm,
group is open to women of all faith. And it should be noted that each session will close in a prayer that is optional. The group will be an open forum for mothers to share their own experiences and process the loss with other women who have been through the same hardship. And so we'll be doing that starting in I believe you can click on it. You can go to our website at the bottom of Elia's Gift, which I'll also place on here a little more prevalent or obvious. You can see we're starting on February the 23rd, and you can sign up. So if you or someone you know is struggling with the loss of a miscarriage or even losing a child very, very young, this is something that'll be a safe space for you guys. And additionally, now going back to what Vero was saying, let's
no
get it, girl.
worries.
Tell me about it. Go model it for us.
Um,
Wait,
so
there we
we
go.
have these little cute sweaters. We also have hoodies and shirts. They're Until We Arise. It's what it says on the front with our logo, but also on the back it
Let's
says
see you.
"What won't change." Oh, I'd have to get up. It's like
Oh, you can't get up.
it's an
Okay.
awkward. It's a whole setup here, but maybe you can show it on there.
Yes, I will.
But so front says "Until We Arise" and the back says "What won't change." And for those of you who have been around for a while, it's a sentence, right? Like, until we arise, what won't change? It's a question, like, what is not going to change? And so it's a great conversation piece, but it's also a way to rep, and it's also a way to support Until We Arise. And so you can go on our website, you can purchase that. And I felt like I was going to say something else, and now I can't remember. But
I know. I'm sorry.
um, no, you're good. Um, yeah, just make sure you're following us. Make sure you're repping us. Oh, for those who are listening, it's a sweater that I was modeling because I realized we also download the audio here.
Yes.
But yeah, and so we just want to thank you guys for listening to today's podcast. To remind you, subscribe. Make sure you're following us on all our social media platforms on Facebook, Instagram, at Until We Arise. And just remember, until we arise, what won't change in our communities, in our lives, um, and in our world. So until we arise.
Until we arise. Thank you, guys.